speaking from experience, this is not the best way to deter a bear.
Well, if a bear gets into trouble, obviously it's trouble from our perspective, but for us, basically a bear having some sort of conflict with humans.
I was inside here reading a book about another bear break-in back in the 30s out at our Wonder Lake Ranger Station, and I hear a slap on the window, thinking that it's one of the gray jays who like to fly in and out of the cabin from time to time. And I look over and there's a young grizzly bear, paws here and head here. At which point I grabbed the skillet, slammed it on the stove, and fortunately the bear fell this way and not that way, and we kept him out of the cabin. He took off running down the trail. You know, the way I usually describe newly independent male bears is they're kind of like teenage boys. And they just take off and usually go get in trouble. This cabin, originally being used as a cookhouse, it was used 3 times a day to provide meals out of. It was built out just near mile 14, about a mile from here. And in the spring and summertime, bears are awake, they're active, they're out, and they're smelling whatever's being cooked in here. And the weakest part of our cabin is our windows. The 300 to 600 pound bear pushes on those glass windows here. He's gonna break right through, join your cook on the inside there. So the best way to keep the bears out is deter them by having nails or spikes drilled outward. Just like you or I would come up, we'd push on that with our hands, we'd think twice about pushing too hard. It's not gonna feel comfortable. Same thing, a bear puts his nose or his paws on that, he's not gonna push very hard. Because they learn so quickly and they figure out that if they got human food once, they should try the same tactic to get it again. Those are situations where we need to sort of intervene and retrain them or train them out of that behavior. And because they're so smart, it's pretty doable if you catch them early on. As you can tell, they'll scratch it up pretty good. Some of the younger bears, the juveniles that come through here earlier this year and last year, have been known to pull the oakum out. I would assume in that sense they're curious, they're wanting to find out if there's anything edible or something that might be good in this oakum. Typically though, they just leave it in a pile here on the floor, scratch up the cabin pretty good. We have a lot of tools that we can use when a bear gets into conflict with people and persists in that sort of behavior. What we try to do is to retrain them out of that sort of behavior back to doing what bears normally would be doing if we weren't around. And we have a management plan that outlines for us how we do that. It starts out with sort of the least intrusive methods that we can use. And depending on the response of the bear, if they don't figure it out early on, then we up our response level in the sort of signals that we're giving them to get them trained out of that quote-unquote bad behavior. Say we have a bear that's in an area that's frequented by a lot of people. I'm not going to bite you. Go ahead and fill in around the porch here.
And the bear just wants to spend time in that area as well. The way that we would start out is to convince that bear to move out of the area. We would simply yell at it, clap our hands, bang pots and pans, somehow make a lot of noise. That tends to be very unpleasant for them, and they want to move out of the area.
Mount McKinley National Park is the very first national park created to preserve wildlife.
Sometimes they're very persistent and they don't get the idea right away. So we would up our level of response, and I have in my hand a whole box full of sort of the tools that we would use. Sometimes we actually use a paintball gun, believe it or not. We found that you can buy clear filled paintballs that don't leave a mark, so we can hit them with one of these and not leave some intrusive mark on their side. There are also things that are shot out of a paintball gun, but they aren't actually filled with any kind of a liquid. It's a hard plastic ball. And when these things hit, they hit with pretty much of a wallop. If you've ever been hit with a paintball, you know that it stings a little bit. It'll get their attention. We've got these things which are called beanbag rounds. There's actually 2 different kinds of bean bags. They all come out of a 12 gauge round that looks very similar to this. The longest range projectile thing that we have that we can fire out of a 12 gauge is something that looks like this. It's called a rubber baton. Sometimes it's called a rubber slug. It's a hard rubber projectile. You hit them with one of those, it's kind of like stepping up the impact of one of these hard rubber balls. And again, these are fired out of a 12 gauge. And so, so that's what they look like. The most opportune place and the best place on their body to avoid injury is to hit them in the butt. It's a big, massive muscle, and we can be guaranteed we're not going to do any harm if we hit them in the butt. The other beauty about hitting in the back end is that they're probably traveling away from you when you hit them, which is exactly what you want them to be doing. You can take a shot in the shoulder. Sometimes that's really effective, especially very late in the season when bears are really fat, because then if you hit them in the butt, they probably aren't going to feel it as well. It's not going to have as much of an impact. One thing we always try to avoid is hitting them broadside. We don't want to hit them in the ribs or in the abdomen. Skin tends to be a little thinner there, and especially with these rubber slugs, there is always the possibility of penetrating the hide in thin-skinned areas, and we always stay away from the head. We don't want to take the chance of hitting them in the mouth, hitting them in the eyes, the ears, or anything else like that. So hitting them in the butt is what we shoot for, and it's usually a pretty nice sized target.
I'm Stephen Zacharias. I'm a living history interpreter here at Savage Cabin, where I represent a Mount McKinley Park Ranger, Raymond McIntyre, who worked here in the park from 1939 to 1941. Savage Cabin is our oldest cabin in the entire park.
Tried to run.